This is a revision video on topic 8D, and we are going to be looking at unicellular and multicellular organisms. So first of all, it's going to be helpful just to look at where are cells when we're talking about living things. So it's important to understand that all living things are made up of cells. So the same way if we were going to look at a house, you wouldn't ask the question of where are the bricks in a house. It's more the idea that you've got bricks, and when you put those bricks together, you build a house. And it's the same idea with a living thing. Living things are made up of cells, and when you put lots of different types of cells, so thinking about a human, if we put muscle cells, blood cells, bone cells, skin cells, if we put all of those cells together, we can gradually start to build up an organism. So some organisms, like humans, are made up of lots of cells, and we call these type of organisms multicellular organisms, meaning they're made up of lots of cells. Some living things are just made up of single cells, so rather than being millions or billions of cells working together, they are just made up of one individual cell, so just one kind of building block. And we call these unicellular organisms. So a bit like a unicycle has got one wheel, a unicellular organism is just made up of one single cell. Now, because unicellular organisms are just made up of single cells, they don't have all of the complex organ systems that multicellular organisms do. So they don't have things like digestive systems to get food, or respiratory systems to get oxygen, or circulatory systems to then transfer oxygen and food molecules around the body. What they rely on is something called simple diffusion to allow substances like oxygen or glucose in their environment to get from outside of the cell to all parts of their single cell. Now, this does limit how big unicellular organisms can be. If they're too big, all the things the organism needs, like oxygen, sugars, they can't get to the middle of the cell. So this cell would be too big to be a unicellular organism, whereas this one, this would be an okay size to be a unicellular organism. So things like bacteria, which fit into the prokaryote kingdom, they can be unicellular. Things like yeast, which fall into the fungi kingdom, they can also be unicellular. Protists, they can also be unicellular. Multicellular fungus, they can fit into both, so you can have single unicellular fungi like yeast, or you can have things like mushrooms. They form multicellular organisms, so fungi is quite diverse. You can have single-celled fungi, or you can have multicellular fungi. Plants, they also fall into the multicellular organism category, and animals, like humans, they also fit into the multicellular organism category. So it might just be worth pausing the video to have a little look at this table, and this just compares the different kingdoms that we talked about on the previous slide. So we've got the prokaryote, the fungi kingdom, the protist kingdom, and the plant and animal kingdom, and it just compares some of the structures that you might find in each of the cells that make up these organisms, whether they're unicellular, like prokaryotes, protists, fungi, or multicellular, like some fungi, plants, and animals. So again, pause the video here, have a go at these 6 quick check questions, and then I will go through the answers once you restart playing the video. So number 1, which of these is a life process? Remember, they are things that all living things need to do: movement, reproduction, sensitivity, growth, respiration, excretion, and nutrition. So to be classified as a living thing, you have to do all of those processes. So respiration is a process that all living things need to do. 2 kingdoms that contain many unicellular organisms. That would be the first one, which is prokaryotes and protists. Animals and plants are always multicellular. Yeast and fungi. Fungi can be multicellular a lot of the time. And this is a tricky one because you might think viruses are unicellular, but viruses technically are not classed as a living thing because they require other living things in order to carry out some of their processes. Number 3, multicellular organisms need transport systems like the circulatory system because diffusion is not fast enough. So a bit like on an earlier slide where we saw this cell here getting all of its substances by diffusion, if we as a multicellular organism were relying on that to happen, we would die long before cells right in the centre of our body were able to get all of these substances. And one feature that prokaryotes have is that they do not have nuclei. So bacteria cells do not keep their DNA in the nucleus. Their DNA is just floating free in the cytoplasm. What is the correct meaning of unicellular? So unicellular is made up of only one cell. It doesn't mean made up of one type of cell, because some simple organisms might be multicellular, but all of their cells might be very similar. It just means made up of only one cell. And the final one, plants and animals are different, and so scientists put them into two different groups called the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom.